very much, and make sure that I'm unmuted. And I just want to say a personal thank you to Registrar Logan, to Dean for again participating in this and giving such a thorough overview of what happened in the primary and most importantly where we're going forward. So we really greatly value this partnership today. So thank you. I'm going to jump in now and talk about some data. So a brand new study that I released with some partners at UC San Diego and UC Riverside. So the study itself, is up on the screen now, is actually, what I'm going to present today is actually highlights from a report that we're releasing to coincide with this event today. So you can, in a little while, we'll put it in the chat, you can visit a website for the newelectorate.org, and you can download the report that I'm going to provide highlights for, and welcome any questions once you view that. If you want to connect with me individually today, because of time, I'll just cover a little bit of that report. The title is How Do Californians Want to Cast Their Ballots During the COVID-19 Crises? And my colleague, so this is not a CCP or California Civic Engagement report. This is actually a report under a project called the New Electorate Study, with my colleagues at UC San Diego, specifically Thad Kauser, Mackenzie Lockhart, Seth Hill, Jennifer Mola of UC Riverside, and then of course myself. I'm just positioning things on the screen so I can see them a little bit better. Okay, next slide, please. So a little bit about our research approach. This is a very large sample. It's a representative survey, statewide survey of California eligible voters, so those are adult citizens. It was conducted online, but with a large enough sample to be representative by the state's largest racial and ethnic groups. It also allows us to delve into specific counties, in particular LA. And our goal really here is to understand, right, from this survey, public opinion around November election. So a number of sub areas that we talk about. So first and foremost, what method of voting do they at this point expect to be engaging in, by mail, in person, by dropping off a mail ballot, and so forth, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Their opinions around what method makes them feel more comfortable, what method makes them feel more confident that their ballot will be cast or actually counted. We ask about their preferences around and their comfort level around waiting in line at polling places, being a potential poll worker at a polling place or vote center. And we also ask them about some specific policy questions that are in play in California and nationally. So as I said, I'll get to some of that and highlight some of that today. It's a survey that was very recently fielded, April 8th through the 22nd. And what I'm going to talk about on the next slide here is just to say that all of these sub-areas, all these subtopics that we talked about, we also employed in an experimental treatment. So we wanted to understand, under the environment of COVID, how that could be impacting people's opinions on all of those sub-areas. So what we did is we randomly divided that very large 12,000 or so plus sample group into 3 groups. So we presented 2 of these groups with truthful summaries of the projections of 2 widely cited teams of scientists. One team projecting a peak of the public health crisis in the spring of 2020, so now. And another team projecting that its impact will peak in the fall. And these are common models from the University of Washington and the Imperial College of London, which many folks have heard. And then a third group didn't get any projections from us at all. So we didn't specifically highlight COVID. We asked these questions of them without presenting a scenario specific to COVID, if that makes sense. Next slide. I won't, for time, talk about these or read these specifically, but I want you to know that we did provide some good amount of detail around these 2 scenarios. And of course, if you read our report, we talk in great length around our methodology specific to these scenarios. Next slide. So how do Californians want to cast their own ballots in November? So just over half, 51.7%, said that they would prefer to vote by mailing in their ballot specifically. And the choices we gave them were mailing in their vote by mail ballot that's automatically sent to them. And of course, now we know that all ballots will be automatically sent, mail ballots will be automatically sent to all voters in California. So 51% said that. We also gave them options though, with regard to not just mailing it, but do they prefer to drop off that vote by mail ballot at a drop box, or do they want to vote in person, either at a vote center or at an in-person traditional polling place? So another about 19% said that the most important option for them, their preference, was dropping off their vote by mail ballot at a drop box. And then at the same time, about 30% said that they wanted to vote in person at a voting site, whether it was a polling place or a vote center. Next slide, please. So I'm going to get into the treatments, experimental treatments, just a little bit here, and then I'll defer you to the paper for the rest of it. So breaking out that 51.7% that I said of all respondents who wanted to specifically send their ballot through the mail, that was the option that they preferred. It was a little different depending on the treatment that they got, the different scenarios that they got. So it was a little bit higher for those people that read the projections around the fall peak, that COVID would peak in the fall around election time. So that was 53.4%. It was about the same for folks that read the projections that it was going to peak in the spring now. And their preference was a little bit lower, right? A smaller number, a smaller percentage of respondents said they preferred to send their ballot through the mail. Those that didn't get any sort of projection, reminder asked about COVID in that sense. Next slide. So I'm going to move away from the experimental treatments because in a very short presentation, it's hard to get into all of those details, but I just want you to know that all of this that I'm going to present going forward is for all respondents, regardless of what treatment they got. But if you want to see some of those differences, go to our report and we talk about it there. So now we do understand that there are preferences, there are differences in preferences by race, ethnicity in terms of what their preferred option was in November for casting their ballot. So again, this is everybody regardless of treatment. So by race, ethnicity, 54% of non-Latino whites said mailing in their ballot was their top option. 54% of Asian Americans, but 48% of African Americans and just about 48% of Latinos. So these differences suggest that if any voting options are made completely unavailable to eligible voters, that maybe there possibly could be some sort of disparate impact across groups. Next slide. And this is a bar chart just showing you exactly what I just showed you a moment ago, just visualizing it. 54%, again, what would be their most preferred way to cast a ballot, and this would be mailing it. 54% for white, 54% for Asian American, and less for a smaller percentage for African American and Latino. Next slide, please. I have a lot to show you, so I'm going to get through it fast. We will make these slides available, all of the slides stay available, so you can peruse them and kind of wrap your brain around them further if you're interested in doing so. When we asked specifically, would you vote if mailing a mail ballot was your only option? Would you vote if mail balloting was your only option? We did hear that 5% of African Americans said they would not vote if their only option was a mail ballot, regardless of how they would send that in, but just a mail ballot. 4.8% of Asian Americans said they would not vote if their only option was a vote by mail ballot. 3% of non-Latino whites and 2.3% of Latinos. Next slide. This is just visualizing what I just mentioned. So if you go to the far right, you see that won't vote set of data, the 3.3, the 5, the 2.3, and the 4.8 by race ethnicity. Next slide. Then we said, well, we asked, would you vote still if voting in person was your only option? You were only given voting in person as your option. Here, 7.7% of non-Latino whites said they would not vote. 6% of Asian Americans, almost 6% of African Americans, and almost 5% of Latinos said they wouldn't vote if in person was their only option. By the way, these percentages seem small, but remember, we have 20 million registered voters in California, 25 million eligible voters in California. Small percentages, but if this actually translated into behavior beyond opinion, but actual behavior in November, we're talking very large numbers, right? Next slide. And I'm giving you statewide numbers, but we will be next week on our website posting an appendix that'll have data specific to LA County. Some of the numbers are different, especially by racial and ethnic groups, but the overall story in all of these slides are the same for LA, if you're wondering, and I want to make sure you know that. So personal preference on how to cast a ballot by race ethnicity. So we're just going to break this out here visually. Again, 7.7%, 5.7%, 4.6%, and 6%. Next slide. Now we asked, what about their comfort level at polling places, with or without social distancing? So we asked eligible voters about their comfort levels with waiting in line at a polling place or working as a poll worker, either with or without social distancing implemented. Next slide, please. So half of those surveys said that they would be comfortable at a polling place waiting in line that did not implement social distancing. So half said they would be comfortable if it didn't implement social distancing. Just shy of 36% of respondents overall said they would feel comfortable being a poll worker in a polling place without social distancing. We didn't ask them if they actually wanted to be a poll worker or not, but just as if would they feel comfortable. But comfort levels were much higher when we said that that polling place would adhere to social distancing protocol. So the comfort level for waiting in line jumped from half to 68.7%, and the comfort level for working at a polling place jumped from 36% to 47.4%, again, when we said that social distancing protocol would be adhered to. Next slide. This is just breaking it out by race, ethnicity. So just to say that comfort levels, this is specific, again, would they be comfortable waiting in line in a polling place if there were no social distancing measures implemented? And we said about half for everybody, if you remember a moment ago. Just to show you that there are pretty significant differences by race, ethnicity. Latinos, 62% would be comfortable. Asian Americans, 36% said they would not be comfortable. 46% for African American and white. Non-Latino, next slide, please. But if we said, would you be comfortable waiting in line, which we did ask, for a polling place that was configured, right, for social distancing guidelines? Again, across the board, there's differences by race, ethnicity, but across the board, everyone increased quite substantially in their comfort level when they heard that there would be social distancing protocols in place. Next slide. Okay, now this is poll worker, again, just breaking out what I showed you a moment ago on those other slides. This is, would you be willing to work as a polling place worker if there were no social distancing measures put in place? Remember, it was about 36% for everybody. Well, you can see there's quite significant differences by race, ethnicity. Latinos being more comfortable, Asian Americans being less comfortable, whites, African Americans, the numbers are right there. Next slide. Now we ask, would you be willing to work as a polling place voter if social distancing measures were adhered to? So we do ask if you would be willing to work as. And you can see again, the differences here are across groups, 40%, 50% for African Americans, that's almost 62% for Latinos, 36% for Asian American. The percentages jump up quite dramatically. Next slide. And again, I'm just giving you some general highlights here. There's much more in the report that I think might be of interest to many of you. So overall, a strong majority of California's eligible electorate, eligible voters, according to our survey, would prefer to cast a ballot by mail in November's election. But not all Californians favor this option. And we say option here kind of loosely because there are real reasons why people, right, choose to vote in person versus voting, real barriers for many groups versus voting by mail. Choices about how to cast ballots vary significantly across racial and ethnic groups. Some voters say that they would not participate if the election were either conducted exclusively by mail or through in-person options. Next slide. And when thinking about in-person voting experiences, voters who read about scientific projections, again, back to those scenarios, which I only talked a little bit at the beginning, but I wanted just to let you know that this element is also in the report. Their comfort level about waiting in line at a polling place or being a poll worker also was impacted by the scenarios that they were presented around, again, fall or spring peak. There was also significant differences in that by comfort level by race, ethnicity, but voters of all types under all scenarios became much more comfortable with casting their ballots in a polling place that adheres to social distancing protocol. Next and last slide. Last thing I just want to mention, which I mentioned a little moment ago, but just to reiterate, this survey just is survey responses are opinion now as things stand. A lot of things can change between now and November, even though we do ask about these different scenarios. We're not necessarily measuring actual behavior. We will only know when, all this will be revealed, of course, in November 2020. But we hope that this data is important, at least for your conversations going forward. Thank you very much.